Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah, and today I'm going to talk about how disappointing my October TBR was. But that does mean I'm super excited to get into my November TBR. It's not that every book was disappointing. It's just that almost every book was disappointing. I struggled for October, but I actually did do pretty all right as far as like reading the books that I set out to read. So we're going to do a little bit of a wrap up of my October reads, and then we're going to talk about what I'm hoping to read for November. So this is kind of on both. If you've been following me, then you already know that this is War and Peace and that I've been working on reading it all year. So we'll stick it on here for now. But it's going to move over, and it's not the only one that's going to move over. So this first stack was my TBR for October, and then this second stack plus a few extras and plus some more of War and Peace is my November TBR stack. So let's just go through these first. We'll start with War and Peace. My goal for October was to read 300 pages of War and Peace, and I did it. I'm very proud of myself. I think it's the most amount that I've read of this book in 1 month. I'm officially past halfway, and I have just about 500 pages left, which feels amazing. I made it to the end of volume 2 and then a good ways into volume 3. Volume 2, wonderful. Finishing the last 100 pages of that was so much fun. I actually read like a lot of this in one day, which really I haven't done because I've been following Tolstoy Together, which is 85 Days of War and Peace, where there is like a specific amount to read every day of War and Peace for a total of 85 days. So to reach a day where I just wanted to keep reading, like so much that I ignored what the Tolstoy Together book said, that's pretty big for me. I had so much fun at the end of volume 2. I wanted to know what was going to happen next more than ever in this book. And then volume 3 happened. And I have been struggling with volume 3, so I had to read about 200 pages of that. It's a lot slower. There's a lot more war than peace. It's kind of cool because at the beginning, it's obviously largely peace, and then the war starts, but there's a large like disconnect between the people that are out on the battlefield and the people that are still like at home living their normal lives. They don't seem to be influenced really at all by the war, except that they like talk about it at their parties, but it feels very removed. And then for volume 3, it's like getting more into it's impacting their lives, which is, it's neat to see that, but just like the war talk in general, like being with decision makers of the war and things like that, it was a lot more prevalent in volume 3, which is where it starts to lose me a little bit. There's still great discussions during those parts and like conversations that come up because of it that I enjoy reading about, but it's nothing that like makes me want to pick it up day to day, which makes it harder to get through altogether. But as for November, I am hoping to read another 250 pages of this. That way, December, I can do the last 250 and officially be done with this in 2023. So I'm going to put this over on this side now. Let's continue on in October. So Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy. This is one of the books that I am reading for my Ted Lasso season 2 video, so I won't talk too much about it because I'm going to talk a lot more about it then. But I feel like this book is one of the books that has made the most sense to me for it being like mentioned in Ted Lasso. There is a lot of discussion about manhood and womanhood, like what it means to be like a man and a woman. And while like the ideas of gender I think are a little bit outdated, I think that it still is very prevalent today. And it had some surprisingly progressive or like insightful conversations for what you would think this would be in for the time that it was written in. Like there's a queer character that seems more like the stereotypical masculine. He gives off more of that than the protagonist does, and specifically the type of masculine energy, which is really like being protective and things like that, that the protagonist wants to have. Like he wants to have those attributes, but this other man has it more than he does, which is kind of funny because you already hear a little bit about that from the protagonist by the time you meet this other character, and then you're like, oh, okay, like, good job, book. So I thought that was pretty good. And then similarly, there's a lot of conversation from the female perspective, although most of the female characters kind of seek fixing their lives through men, with the exception of like one. But I do think that it brings up a lot of like good conversations around that and like why do they do that and why the specific men that they turn to. There's a lot more than just that, but that was the part of it that was the most interesting to me. So next up is The Fountainhead, which is the book that I was really intimidated by reading going into this. I ended up doing the audiobook for quite a bit of it because I didn't love it. In fact, I was annoyed for a lot of it. Like I didn't like the characters. Oh my gosh, I hated the main character. Like I could not stand him. What is his name again? Rourke? I didn't like the female love interest. I don't know what she would be called. I mean, I didn't really like any character, but the main ones I disliked the most. Like, I get the idea of this book, or like the idea of these characters and like not compromising on the kind of things that you want to create in the world. But this attitude of like, you can just do that and good things will happen is such a stupid point of view to come from. Like, it's so... like, these characters are very privileged to be able to, like, have a life where they can just, like, think that way. I mean, I guess the main character at one point, he does get, like, a manual labor job because he's not making any money. So there's that. Like, he's willing to have that life versus, like, being an architect and designing a building that he's, like, not 100% a fan of. Basically, he wants to design these buildings that literally nobody wants. Very few people want. And he's supposed to be, like, this genius. Like, some people just want a standard building. Or, like, a standard building that you can have, like, a little bit of fun with, but not, like, some weird, like, architectural thing where, like, you're making a statement as an architect versus the person that, like, owns the building forever. In my mind, it would have been easier for him to, like, design a few buildings that were closer to what people wanted, but then adding, like, a few different things, or not being so hard on, like, I'll design this for you, but you can have zero input whatsoever, which is crazy to me. But to like do that for some projects, get more well known, have people like respect you and what you do, and then start like getting more creative with it. Just to expect people as soon as you enter the field to be like, yeah, do whatever you want. I don't need to see the plans. I didn't like this book. And like the scenes, the way that the two like main characters would talk to each other, like the male and female protagonists would talk to each other. It made my skin crawl. I hated it. She wants him to force himself on her, and he does, but that's never explicitly said by her. Like, she never says, like, that's a thing that I want. He just decides that that's what she wants. And because, you know, you're in the book, you can tell, like, that's what she wants too, because it says it. But you can't just assume that. Like, oh, I hate it. Okay, anyways. And then we have The Greatest, which is another of the Ted Lasso books. All the books so far have been Ted Lasso, except for War and Peace, I guess. The Greatest, I didn't read this fully. I just went through any story that seemed like it would be relevant to Ted Lasso. I found a lot of them, actually. But basically, it's just supposed to be about, like, sports and then what they can teach us about, like, the world and life. Some of the stuff didn't seem very helpful. Some of the stuff, it did seem like it would be pretty helpful. This author has written like a few nonfiction books, but this is actually a collection of articles that he has written for like other things that have then been collected into this book. So I would say that if you were interested in something like this, I would go for another one of his books because they seem to be kind of along the same theme, but without being just like a collection of articles, because sometimes they would feel a little repetitive because they were written for separate things. And then we have Letters to a Young Poet. I haven't read this yet. Technically, I started it. I read like a couple pages. This is the fourth Ted Lasso book that I was meant to read for October. This one I just didn't get to. So that's actually moving over to November TBR. Forgot what month it was. Then we have Murder in the Family by Cara Hunter. This was a book that my friend had given me to do like a little buddy read on Storygraph, which was fun, although she was traveling when I started it. And you know how you never know, like when you go on a trip, if it's going to be one of those where you're going to be reading a ton and like super excited to get back to the hotel room and read at the end of the day, or there'll be like a bunch of relaxing moments where you can read, versus a trip where it's just kind of go, go, go. And by the end of the day, you just like want to collapse. Hers ended up being the go, go, go type when she thought it was going to be the other type. So I ended up reading all of this while she read about 15% of it. So we didn't get like exactly the experience that we were going for, but I was just not having it with any of the other books that I was reading. And this one was the closest one to like an enjoyable time that I was having. I tried to wait, and then I was like, I need to just read this. Also, I was forgetting things that were happening, which is not great in a murder mystery, especially one that is like billed as one that you should be able to solve yourself. I didn't solve this myself. Almost every thought that I had was wrong, but not like in a fun way. I don't know. This does have some twists and turns, and like that's fun. It's all done in the style of this like TV show that, okay, so the producer of the TV show, or maybe he's the director, his stepfather died like 20 years before when the book is set. And then he wants to figure out who did it, basically, like who murdered his stepfather. So he is doing this TV series to bring together some people to try to figure that out. It's written as the episodes, but then also after every episode, there's like text exchanges and voicemails left on phones and newspaper articles about what's going on. So it's a little bit like mixed media, I guess, which is a cool way to tell the story, and that made it read a bit faster. But overall, I wasn't really all that thrilled with the ending. It felt like they gave us a really large, like, red herring area to go down. And I don't mind red herrings, but I don't like when you go down so far and then it seems like it was entirely irrelevant at the end. And that's kind of what this felt like, unfortunately. Next is Caliban's War by James S.A. Corey. Now, this one was the most fun I had this month reading a book because it was a reread for me. I already knew that I liked this book. I liked the series. So this is just exciting and a fun time. But it was a buddy read, so I could only read so much of it a day. So this is the second book in the Expanse series, which is the space opera. So it's like a multiple perspective book where you see a lot of people's reaction to a situation that's happening that is mostly between like Earth and Mars, and people being on like one side or the other of that conflict. But also there should be something that people are worrying about a lot more, which is kind of like an alien situation. That's, I think, the best way that I can describe this book without giving any spoilers. It's so much fun to read. I'd already read the first two books before we decided to buddy read the series. Hopefully, I mean, hopefully people will want to continue on to the third book. We haven't talked about it quite yet, but I had read the first two, and now we've read the first two as a group. So I'm really excited about getting to book three. Then we have The Woman Inside, which was sent to me by Celadon Books. And unfortunately, I didn't really like it. I liked the beginning. I got into it pretty quickly. It's multiple perspectives. There's three different perspectives. Basically, at the heart of the story, there is this rich couple, and the woman is very ill and she stays home like all the time. And the man is just, I don't know, he's just doing his life. And then one of the perspectives we get is their cleaner, this person that the cleaner is renting a room from, and then a woman that knows the husband. So those are kind of our three perspectives. They start off as being more like distant from each other, but then you see kind of how they connect, or they just like come together during the story. So that was kind of cool, experiencing that at the beginning of the book. But I just got so bored throughout this. I stopped caring about like any bit of the mystery, and I think the ending was pretty anticlimactic. Yeah, overall, it's not a book that I would recommend. I didn't really have fun. I wish I had DNF'd it. It was one of those, like, I got to the end of it and I was like, I should have DNF'd that, when I was kind of feeling like that's what I should do. But the reason I didn't DNF it was because I already DNF'd a book this month, and it felt bad to do too, and that is Reckless Girls. I DNF'd it. How far did I get? I was 13 chapters in, 140 pages into Reckless Girls, which is at about halfway through it. It wasn't interesting to me. Again, I didn't really care about the characters and the setting. The setup wasn't interesting enough for me to continue. I don't understand books that are marketed as thrillers, but then like nothing thrilling happens for the first half. There was, I think, one moment that was a little bit like, that was weird. And that was the closest we got. So this one's about a woman and her boyfriend who are supposed to like go sailing on this boat at some point and like live their lives basically on a boat. She's really excited for that, but it doesn't end up really happening, or they have to like fix the boat up first. And then they get these two girls that are willing to pay to have the boat fixed up if they will take them to this really remote island. So they do, which takes a long time to get there, even though this book is like marketed as being on an island. So I was already kind of annoyed that I was like, can we get to the island yet? Like, what is going on? And then there's like a little bit of hinting towards there being something weird about these two girls. But besides that, there's just really not a lot of intrigue there. And then we have the Shards, which I am still reading. So I haven't finished this one yet. I have about 150 pages left. I'm enjoying this one, but it's just really tough to read. It is emotionally draining. I feel discomfort and dread for most of it. That's the best way I can describe it. That being said, I think it's a really good, really well-written book. I'm excited to find out like what happens. And every step of the way, I've wanted to learn more about these people and like dive further into the story. But that doesn't mean that I don't have those feelings like while I'm reading the story. So I've had to take a lot of breaks and I'm reading it a lot more slowly than I initially thought that I would, which is honestly fine. I want to give this book the time that it deserves. Like I want to sit and think on some of the moments more in this book than I expected to want to. So that is also a part of my TBR for November. But before we get into like my full November TBR, there's actually one other book that was an ebook that I said that I might read as a part of my October TBR, and that was The Golden Spoon. So I've read half of that. I just needed something light and fun and a quicker read. Turns out it's not that quick of a read. It's pretty slow paced and it's honestly also kind of boring. I would definitely more recommend it to people that want to read a book that's about like being in the Great British Bake Off versus wanting to read a book that's like a thriller or mystery. It's so light on like the mystery and the intrigue that I just don't even know what I'm supposed to be curious about. And that's not good for a mystery. I should know what the mystery is. I haven't officially DNF'd that one yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if I ended up DNFing it. Okay, then we've already talked about Letters to a Young Poet being on my November TBR and another 250 pages War and Peace. And now for the other books. Before I forget, let's talk about the Britney Spears memoir, because that's one of the books that I want to read in November. It just came out. It's also nonfiction November, which I almost never I don't think I've ever participated in it. I've always wanted to participate in it, but I don't typically read a lot of nonfiction. But I feel like that one's a good one. And also I'm just really curious about her memoir in general. I grew up listening to Britney Spears. She was just such like a prevalent figure while I was growing up. And my perspective on her and her situation, and like any more child or younger stars of that like generation, changed so much from like when I was young to now. Just like how harsh people are on them and how much they like would talk about their bodies. It's crazy. Like it's insane that anybody thought any of that was okay. So I ended up downloading her memoir on Libro FM. So I think I'm going to listen to that this month. Next we have About a Boy by Nick Hornby. I think I watched the movie for this. There's a movie about this, right? I'm pretty sure I watched it years and years ago. But this is one of the Ted Lasso season 2 books for that video. So I don't fully know what it's about. It's just that it was mentioned in the show. So I'm going to read it. So if all goes to plan, in November, I will have finished all of the books that I am meant to read for that video. Speaking of, another one for that video is Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake, which is a book about mushrooms, as far as I can tell. How fungi make our worlds, change our minds, and shape our futures, which actually sounds really, really interesting. This is not something that I would think that I would be interested in, but I am, and it's a nonfiction, so it works for nonfiction November. I know that there are technically prompts that go with nonfiction November, but my whole goal of it is just purely to read more nonfiction. Then next we have The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and then I'm also planning on reading Sula by Toni Morrison as a part of a read-along that is going from now until the end of January. So these two books are going to be in this month. So I got this one from the library. Sula is coming from the library. It should be here any day now, but I don't actually know what either of them is about. I'm going in pretty blind. But Toni Morrison is an author I've always wanted to read from, and she's one of those authors that I feel like you're going to want to talk to other people about and discuss her books. So I'm excited to be a part of a group that's going to be doing that. Next up is The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. So the TBR spin for this month was to read a translated book, which is perfect because I had 2 books left on my TBR spin, obviously for November and December. And one of them happened to be a translated book. So this is translated from Japanese by Stephen Snyder. So this will be the second Yoko Ogawa that I've read. I read The Memory Police by her and I really enjoyed that one. And I've heard really good things about this one. So there's a housekeeper that's hired to take care of this professor. And then she's also got a 10-year-old son with her. Then they have just like a good relationship, I guess. And there's a lot of math involved. That's what I know. I'm so curious about like what this is, but it also just seems like a nice, quiet, peaceful read. In my head, I'm like comparing it to Remains of the Day and like the feeling that I had reading that book by Kazuo Ishiguro, which is one of my favorites of all time. So I'm hoping that it evokes those same types of feelings. Next, we have The Last Housewife by Ashely Winstead. Ashely Winstead, I read In My Dreams I Hold a Knife and Midnight is the Darkest Hour, which just came out of hers. And this is the only thriller I have left that I haven't read. So I don't actually know too much of what this is about because I purely bought it because it's Ashely Winstead and I kind of want to go into it blind. But I do know there is a cult in it in some form because I just watched Nerdy Nat Reads' video, her 5x5 with cult books, and this was one of the books that she read. And so since I was already planning on reading this one and another one this month that are cult related, I kind of decided to make it a whole thing. And now I'm going to do a little reading vlog video that's just focusing on books about cults. So another one that's for that is Cultist by Amanda Montell, which also works because it's a nonfiction book. This one I got a while ago. It was first mentioned to me by Jill from the Book Bully. She reads a lot of nonfiction, but this is supposed to be about like how many things can be like a little bit cultish. It's not necessarily just about like major cults, but the cultish factors in many, many things. And then the last book that's going to be a part of that is Rouge by Mona Awad. This has just been on my like anticipated list basically as soon as I heard that it was coming out, and then I've just accepted that I am excited to read it, even though I don't remember what it's about. This was another book from that 5x5 video that Nerdy Nat Reads did. Oh yeah, it's this girl that's like really obsessed with skin and skincare videos, but also it seems like it might go a little bit into some supernatural stuff just based off the end of the synopsis that mentions demons. So I don't know if those are like figurative demons or literal demons, but I'm excited to find out. And then we have the last book for my Ted Lasso video, which is The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. This one I don't have a book jacket for because I bought it used from Better World Books. This just kind of seems like a fast-paced classic book, and just being like a good like mystery or like hunt to figuring something out. And then lastly, we have a book that I've just oddly got really excited to read, even though it's been on my TBR for a long time, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is like the dark academia book. I've read The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, and I really liked that. I own The Little Friend by her, but I haven't read it yet. But I kind of just decided that I want to read The Secret History. It's on my 100 books bucket list, and it just seems like the right time of year for it, even though it's still very hot here in Florida, so the dark academia vibes are not quite here yet, but I'm hoping they're coming soon. And if not, I'm going to force it by reading books that will hopefully make it feel more like fall time. Also, I'm starting back up my master's degree this month, so I feel like dark academia just, I don't know, maybe if I like romanticize the idea of doing schoolwork, then it'll make it more fun to actually do schoolwork. So this one's set in a New England college, and I think there's like a mystery that goes along with it, but I actually don't know. I feel like a lot of these books I didn't know what they were about. I apologize for that. There is one other one that's like it's a maybe, and it's a probably not, but it is a maybe, which is called Plastic, and I don't remember the author, but it's a book that I was sent the eGalley arc for, and it looks really good, and it's about this like plastic girl living in the real world, but there's something like deeper going on, and I don't know, it sounds cool, but I will say mostly it was the cover that got my attention. Anyways, that is my TBR for November. Once again, ambitious, but I don't know any other way, I guess. As always, I'm aiming to read at least 8 of the books that I set for myself. I'm learning now between like 10 and 13 books that I want to read. But if I read 8 books in a month, I'm pretty happy with that. Did I make it last month? I did not. I didn't make it last, unless you count like the 300 pages that I read of War and Peace, which is like the length of a book, especially considering these pages are very dense and the text is very small. So if you count that and you count DNFing Reckless Girls, then I did read 8 books in October. But if you don't, then I only read 6. What can you do? Hopefully this month goes better. And hopefully I enjoy the books more. Anyways, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know what your favorite book of October was and what book you're most excited to read in November. And consider subscribing if you liked the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.